All right. Hi, everyone. So my name is Eduardo. I'm a front-end developer. I'm a member of the core team of vuejs, the author of the router and Pinia. And those are two topics I really care about, as you can imagine. You can find me online as Pozva, by the way, on GitHub and Twitter. So if you have any question or anything, that's what you should try. I'm going to try not to move too much with the hair. And today, I want to talk to you, or I want to convince you, rather, to stop writing your own routes. Now, some of you probably have already, if you use Nuxt or a Vue plugin page or something. Who has stopped writing their own routes? All right, just a few. So if you haven't already, so for the other ones, I hope these convince you that you should move forward to this direction because it does give you a lot of advantages, okay? But at the same time, I don't blame you, I understand you, because the routing itself is still unknown to most people. Now, you might think you know routing. Wait, sorry, let's see. Yeah, no noise. You might think you know routing very well, but the truth is, when I go doing some consulting with teams, most of the people don't know the routing, and the truth is they don't even need to know how the routing works behind the scene, or even they don't need to know most of the basic concepts of routing. And this is normal because in front-end, we have new APIs all the time. Okay, we have to keep up with all these APIs, and so it's really not easy. And the ones related to routing are pretty weird. There were one time where we were using the hash, so we have these URLs with a hashtag in them, and then we moved to a normal URL in single-page applications. And so other things change as well. We have multiple ways to access the location. We have the location object, but we also have the history push state to change that URL. And so we could access different ways. We could parse the location differently. We could read them as an object, as a string. And you have to cover with all these APIs that change. We have multiple events on has change. Then we have the pop state event as well. Both of them react differently to things that happen on your page, so you might need both. But the idea is, with a router, you don't need to care about these things, right? They abstract that for you. And it's good they do, because there are things that cannot be controlled if we don't know how navigation is being triggered. Fortunately, or hopefully, this will change with the navigation API, which is still a spec. It hasn't been accepted, so to say, per all the browsers. So namely, Safari hasn't pronounced the word yet. And the API changes all the time anyway, so it's not like you're going to use it. And then we also have different parts of the application that come together through the router or that pass by the router. So you need to use the router as a way of manipulating that. For example, the URL can be seen as application state. If you use state machines, you can even use it as a part of the state machine. But even so, even without that, if you have a page query or a search, you probably use the URL as a state. Then we have the page transitions, which we also have a new API coming, right? That is still, I think, not supported by all the browsers. Not going to say Safari doesn't, but probably. And still, it goes through the router, right? There are probably things you have to do if you want to integrate that API with the router. You have data fetching, which you don't have to integrate through the router, but you could, especially if you want to integrate with the URL changing aspects and stuff like that. And then we have a long list of vocabulary, so this is not extensive. You have route records, redirects, route locations, normalized route locations, nested routes, named views, static segments, dynamic segments, navigation guards, navigation failures, and dynamic routing. I'll be surprised if a single person really knows very well all of the concepts I'm talking about here, because you don't really know, you don't really need to know, sorry. When you use them, you just look them up on the documentation, right? That's part of the learning. And it's also an important topic for what I'm talking about today. And so what do we do? What we try to do is simplify these routing system. We try to abstract some of the concepts so you don't have to think about all these terms that you only need in some occasions. So one of the most common things is simplifying the routing by using the file system. So instead of having to write your routing manually, create router without routes array, you write the files and then some build time, some compiler picks it up and creates that code for you, right? And some people will think that when you do this, you are losing control. You're definitely losing some flexibility because you don't have access to that code that you usually write. So you cannot just add the meta property there, or rather, you have to do it in another way, okay? But it's important to notice that even though these cases become more complicated, which we can name them as edge cases, the rest, which is probably most of the code you're writing, becomes so much simpler. Okay? And this is something we don't think too much about sometimes, but if you think about, let me just do a graph real quick. If you think as the x-axis will be how common something, how common is a feature for you to write. So how often will you write these kind of features? And then this will be the complexity on the y. If you have a feature that has a baseline that is complex, and then it becomes more complicated, that's what we have right now. We have to write that array of routes all the time. So it has a base complexity that is already high. And then the other cases become a little bit more complicated because you just have to learn new concepts, new vocabulary, et cetera, et cetera. But what if we could have something that is linear? So at some point, we have all these cases that we have here are just so much easier to do, or cost 0 even. And I'm just showing something linear, but it could be also exponential. It's, at the end, it's just a speculation, to be fair, all right? But what I want to show you is that we can get these, okay? And having something that is very easy or even non-existent in terms of cost for you to write, if it's 90% of the things you do all the time, it's really worth. And it really also aligns with the path of learning, because you want to be able to intuitively know what to do if it's something you do commonly, but it's OK to have to look at the documentation for something that is more complicated, because at the end, it's going to take you less time in total. I'm just going to clear up this thing. All right. So one of the things we do is keeping everything together. So this is something you know already because you use probably Vue files, OK? And we have the script, the template, and the style at the same place. So whenever you use the script and you add something to the variable or reactive thing or a new CSS class, you can add that right away into the template. You don't have to switch files. You don't have to switch context for your brain. And this is important. And so the file tree as a router tree is also similar, but it has also other concepts that I want to explain to you. So when you write a route, in all the cases, you still want to create a new component, and then you want to say, OK, this component is going to map to this URL. And that's how you create the route record. But what if you could stop there? What if you could just write the component right away? That's what makes the thing intuitive, okay? That's what makes Next.js routing intuitive, okay? And so then everything becomes predictable. You have a one-on-one mapping for a URL and a file. So you know that if you go to the slash, you are rendering an index.vue file in a pages folder. If you go to a /about, there will be an about.vue file in a pages folder, and so on. And then you also know that you have a colon ID that's going to become a parameter, okay? Sorry, not a colon ID, but brackets. At the end, it's just a syntax that since the files are always there, you will never forget about that syntax. It's pretty much you will learn them in one day, probably, because then you see them every day. And so the idea is, by using the file tree as a route tree, we are removing the glue code, okay? We are making the tools generate that glue code for us, so we can focus on writing the interesting code. Another code that is just mechanic, that doesn't have any interesting parts. And we can do this for more things, okay? We can let the tool generate all the things because we are relying on this one-to-one mapping that is predictable. We can have typed route params. We can have data fetching as well. And anything else you want to increment to your routes, like adding new meta properties or whatever. And so today I want to show you one of these examples. I want to show you the type route params. So maybe this is something you know, but if you check the route.params object, you just get a generic, in terms of type system, generic object that can have any key, and any value can be a string or an array of strings. Now, this is a shame, because usually when you use your routes, you know that you will be on a specific URL. You know that you'll be on a specific route. So you know that you'll have some params. The query is a different story, because the query can be changed by the user. You don't have control over that. So at some point, I think this is a 1.5 year old pull request. It was April 2020, I think. Pickaxe, so Carlos, another core team member, created a pull request to the router to add type params. Now, it didn't start exactly like this, okay? It didn't start exactly as parsing literal strings in TypeScript, which is something I'm going to show you very briefly, not really digging into the code. But the idea is you could manually write the code saying, this name route is going to have this kind of object of params. So the route's user profile is going to have an object with an ID and a string. And it's always there. There is no way I have an array. There is no way I have an undefined value. Okay? Now, it evolved into something. I reworked the pull request to add an automatic, we could say, runtime-based type safety, but it was runtime for TypeScript perspective, so at a type level. And it allows you to just take the array of routes and generate some kind of map, okay, where you can associate to each named route an object, a shape of params. Now, there was a problem with this approach, is that TypeScript can get very slow. Now, maybe some of you have already faced these problems where you have just TypeScript slowing down your compilation pipeline. These are two issues on TypeScript repository. One talks about poor condition with string literal union types, and the other one talks about exponential compilation slowdown with conditional types. Bad luck for us, I use both. So you can imagine that the whole thing didn't scale very well. It worked up pretty well for 20 routes, 30 routes, and then it starts to get really slow very quickly to the point where it just doesn't give you a feedback. So you just hover your thing on TypeScript in your editor, and it doesn't pop any message, and it's like loading. So I discovered this after implementing the whole thing. It was a bit unfortunate. The code, I'm not too, how to say? At the end, I wasn't bothered too much, because the kind of code I had to write to make this work isn't very pretty. It was very complex and difficult to maintain, even though I tried to make it readable. But as you can see, I couldn't resist myself and have one single letter, sometimes generics and stuff, like PP. I don't even know what it means anymore. And this is not even the worst. I think this is one of the worst. This is real type you could run in production, OK? It was pretty much a parser of string literals. I improved this one over the time. It becomes shorter, but still. Gets pretty ugly. You can see the whole file if you want to, just for curiosity. People get very crazy with TypeScript. It's very cool. I think it's string complete, I read somewhere. So you can code pretty much anything you want. The problem is you only have ternaries for flow control. So that's why you only have ternaries in there. No if, no fors. And so if you want to get fancy with TypeScript, you have to go through these, OK? And I do have one advice, and I know you're going to thinking, well, the advice, yeah, don't do these things. Yeah, sure. This is not the kind of things you should do in TypeScript, but if you have to, there are probably no other ways. But just try to make them real quick. It's like try to make the whole thing in the same window of time, maybe a couple days, okay, a week. But try to do it as one task over multiple days if you need to. Try to comment things, like on the ternaries, this is the case for this, this is the case for that. And try to use multi-words for the generics. Your future self will thank you. Other than that, yeah, try not to do this, OK? So I had to drop this idea, go back to the basics, and say, OK, we need to go back to this map, which is complexity-wise, way simpler. We don't have this exponential problem of conditionals. Now, the idea is you don't want to write this code, okay? You don't want to write this map. You could, but it's just cumbersome. It's the glue code. It's not interesting. So what we want is to let a tool do it for us. So in practice, it becomes a little bit more complicated, just so we can have types that are a bit more terse and that handle all the cases, like when you push, when you take the route from the use route, which are different row location. One is normalized and the other is not. And then other helper types, like the existence in Vue Router, that allows you to not only have by default all the possible route locations with all the possible names, all the possible params, but also pass a generic so you can specify, if you're sure about it, that you are on a specific route or that you can be in one or two routes if you want to. Now, the way we do this is through a plugin. So it's an Unplugin Vue Router. Unplugin, it's just a library to write plugins that work with Vite, Rollup, Webpack, CLI, and ESBuild at the same time. So this plugin just works, usually should work with anything you're working with. But then I'm going to use Vite just for the demos because it's just better. And so you start by adding this plugin to your config. And then what you do is replace any imports you have from Vue Router to Vue Router Auto. And so this module doesn't really exist. Is generated on the fly. I mean, not exactly, not everything is on the fly, but it's generated by the Unplugin. And so it's going to augment all the types. So you have the existing API from Vue Router, but augmented. Okay? And you're still in control because you can still get access to the router instance. You still create the router yourself. You just don't pass the routes array because it's written for you. And then if you want to modify the routes array, you can also do it. Now, this is a runtime, I would say, change of the routes. But you can still think about build time changes of the routes. Okay? It's not implemented yet, so I don't have any sample code to show you. But it's something that is intended to be added. And then if you want to customize single routes, you can also use a macro, which might change in the future. I'm not going to align with that. But you can have this define page, similar to define props, if you have seen that. For the script setup, it also works outside of script setup anyway. Or you can use a route block, which is not highlighted. And I'm sorry, it just overthrows the screen a little bit. But you can add a custom language as well. So YAML, it becomes shorter if you are into that. And so I want to show you all these things with a little demo. And hopefully I can change the displays again. So I can have a mirror. There we go. So I cloned. There we go. So this is very small, probably. I have to zoom out a little bit. And let's just close everything. Nope. There we go. Up. And then how does that look? Let me just open a file. Can everybody read? Show me if you can read very well. You want more? OK. Let's just add another one just in case. So I have, this is a Vitess repository. I already installed the plugin just in case the network fails or whatever. And I'm just going to run the dev. And it opens the project. No, not that one. There we go. So here I have the page that started from Vitess. And I'm going to add the plugin just to show you. So it's already installed, so I can skip that. Let's minimize that. And let's just bring this here. It'll be easier. All right. So I start by opening the vidconfig, and I'm going to go here and say this is going to be Vue Router. Now, I'm replacing an existing plugin, but not to dismiss the author. The author has built a plugin that works with Vue Router, React, and other things. Okay, so he's invited to the repository I'm working on. It doesn't have the types thing, and I'm really focusing on something for Vue Router. So it's not exactly, it has some overlap, but I don't plan on having something that works for everything. So I add the plugin, I go here, I can just change these to Vue Router. The API, it's very similar because, well, I want to keep something that is compatible with the other library. And here, since this project has auto import, so I don't have to import manually things, I can remove that, and I can add the ones exposed by the Unplugin, which are not auto-completing. I don't know why, but it's fine. There we go. Now, let's go down here, and there we go. OK, so I have the server running already. So you see here I have a new file that has been created. OK, this is the file that contains all the types. All right. Other than this, I still have a few changes to make. So I need to go to the main TS, and I need to change the thing here. This doesn't work anymore. I don't know why it's not highlighting it and saying, hey, this is not correct. But I have to use Vue Router, auto, and usually I will get the create router. But here I need the actual array of routes, so I'm just going to get that from here. I'm going to say routes. And I'm going to remove this line where I call setup layouts. Instead, I'm just going to pass it here. So I'm just going to put in multiple lines and say setup layouts with the routes. And now I can remove this one here. OK, and I should be set up. This should be all I need to do. The website should still work. All right, everything still works. So there is another plugin of layouts here, which I'm not going to explain, but that's not my own plugin. OK, so here is the thing. We already had an automatic file-based routing working. What we didn't have before, which I should have shown you, but I forgot, is the autocompletion. So let's take a file here, like, for example, userId. Now I have the autocompletion, OK? So if I do push and I put a name here, I now have autocompletion of all the names I have on the page folder, OK? So if I choose, for example, hi name, then I can put some params. And here, I will only have access to name. If I put anything else, it will give me a TypeScript error. OK, this is typed. And as you can see, it's not slow. It doesn't have a, although it wasn't slow with slow little files anyway. So these type API can be seen anywhere. All right. So for example, if I do router.currentRoute.value.name equals something. If I do an if, well, this is just TypeScript, so that is going to work as well. I can do here, then router.currentRoute.value.params. Now it's name, because TypeScript is able to do to select the union, the type that comes from the union that is correct. And then I was talking about some generics. So when you do use route, here we also have a union of all the possible routes. Now, here's the thing. You can pass a generic here, where you can say, well, this is the index. So I know that the route is going to be this one. And now, as you can see the type here, route location normalized type from the route name map / which is the name of the route, okay? Which are very similar to the actual URL generated or the file tree. This is something you can customize. It's just that it makes it easier to know which route it's with. You don't have any transformation, fancy transformation on the name. Now, this thing is not easy to type. So another thing you can do is here pass the actual string, which autocompletes, so it's also more convenient. And so here, for example, I know that the route is going to be this one because I'm on that page. So I can do these kind of things. Okay, so that's pretty nice. All the other things work. So you can imagine everywhere you have a route, it will work. OK, so what else did I need to show you that was cool? The router links. So let's search for some router links. I know I have two kinds of them. We have this one. So here we have an object hi. This is something you usually don't know. don't do, sorry. Instead, you try to use the name route and let the router handle the encoding for you. So instead, you do this. You do name, and here you select the route. You go params. You go to completion name, and then other name, I think. Yeah. And there you go. You have something typed. If you do anything that is not correct, it's going to tell you that, hey, the type here doesn't work. Well, here it just thinks that params is another thing. Why not? It's TypeScript anyway. And so we have a typed and autocompleted router link. And it also works with strings. Now, with strings, we don't get the type strictness, so to say. So if I try to trigger autocompletion here, I get all the possible routes. But as you can imagine, we don't really write hi name. We write hi something. Okay. And as you can see, I can type anything here. It doesn't really care about the URL. It accepts any string. Because, well, here you can also have the query, the hash, anything you want. So we don't want to limit that. And also, if you want to add some extra checking, it becomes really expensive for TypeScript. So it's really not worth at the end. This, however, works. And so if I want to add a new page, let me check the timer, see how much time. OK. If you want to add a new page, for example, you just create the file. OK? And so, well, you create a file here. Let's say we want to create a new page. I can even create a markdown file because it's handled by the vuejs template. But let's say we want the dashboard, which I'm not going to build. Template, and then here, dashboard. So now if I go to the website, I can see in the routes that I have this dashboard URL. Don't mind the double nesting. This is the setup layouts thing that I have. And I don't have a link, but if I go to the editor here on the footer, I can just here say dashboard. And it autocompletes as well because the files for the typings are regenerated. So here I can go to the dashboard, and there you go with a page. OK, so now how does this work? I'm going to show you the actual code generated. What happens is that the plugin generates this file, type router. And, well, it's a bit long. It can get really long. Let me just close this one. And we have this route name map that generates all the routes. You can even add your own if you want to. And then this name map is used to create the custom types with the actual extended types. You have the route location normalized, the loaded one, the resolve, the route location without the normalized version. These are all types that exist within Vue Router. And so these ones are extended with all the type information. So they just work out of the box. By default, you see here we have an optional generic. So they are backward compatible. If you add the generic, they become more strict. If you don't, it just gives you all the possibilities of all the routes. And then we have the params and all the things. And then use route, use link, the guards, and here some other stuff that for another talk, except for the define page. So if I want to customize any of these, let's say I want to change the name of the index, all right, which is here. Here I can call define page, which usually it's typed, yes. So here, let's say the name is going to be home. All right. Now, if I check the type router, normally, no. I should see home here. Now, why don't I do? Maybe I forgot something. I tried this just before, but let's see. If I need to, I have a bug or something. This is weird. Maybe the request to the page. Back. Let's see here, the index here. I do have the meta property I just added, and I have the name home. The question is why it's not here updated. OK, I'm going to leave that on the side. The point is, you get the properties you define for the route on the record, okay? So you can customize anything you want. And of course, if I change the name, for example, of this one, which is being used in some places, well, I will see some errors because the name, just not gonna be very original here. The name is used in some places. Now, why is not complaining? And normally it complains here. It doesn't complain because the type route DTS file hasn't been regenerated, which is definitely a bug. And I can probably just fix it by rerunning the server. But anyway, no. So I have something else broken. No, this is just something else. OK. And we are going to finish on, well, the route block is the same. It doesn't have too much anything new. This is something that also the Vue plugin page implements. So by default, I think it's JSON 5, so we don't have to put the double quotes around the names and stuff. So here, if I do, let's just use meta test. Hello. So if I open here the routes, and I think it's this one, I can see here I have the meta property. So everything is just picked up on the fly by the compiler. And there was one last thing I had to say. Yeah, about the data fetching, it does enable you to kind of add pretty much anything if you want at build time or runtime. So you can add meta fields to the route, you can add functions or navigation guards, etc. So there is an RFC that is still on the works. It's already published for those who are adventurous and want to check work in progress things. It's already on the vuejs RFCs repository for data fetching layer on the router with this plugin in mind. But I will let you check that if you want by yourselves. Let me go back to the slides. I just want to finish to give you the links. So Unplugin Vue Router is the package I show, same name on GitHub. The demo code, there is a link here. It's a GitHub repository, which I think I need to go public. It's probably still private. And then the slides, you can find them on esm.ease/SWYR. Stop writing your routes. That's just the letters, all right? And that's it. I hope I convinced you that this is a way to go forward. Show you how much better of a development experience not writing your route enable, and that at some point in the future you will adopt also these stance. Thanks.